Welcome, everyone. My understanding is that we are ready to roll. Am I wrong about that? Is there someone at NARST who will be launching us, or is it up to me to do introductions? Okay, based on that resounding silence, I'll go ahead and get things started. Hello, everyone. I'm Julie M. Smith. I'm a senior education researcher at the Institute for Advancing Computing Education. We are a small nonprofit focused on computer science education and AI education, more focused on K-12, but also doing some pre-K and higher ed work. And I am very happy to be with you today to present this NARST webinar on teacher perspectives on generative AI. And let me start by giving you a little bit of backstory about this project. It's somewhat unusual. It began with MIT's Teaching Systems Lab, working with Diamond Shoals Productions. And the latter, probably more familiar to you, the former probably more familiar to you. Diamond Shoals production works mostly on podcasts. And so the idea behind this project is that they would amass a very large set of interviews, mostly with teachers about generative AI, but they also interviewed some administrators. And when I say teachers and administrators, this is K-12, some administrators and also some students about generative AI use. And this wasn't focused in particular on any distinct topic within generative AI use, but was more general. So it wasn't just about computer science education. It wasn't just about academic integrity. It was sort of spanning whatever topics were of interest or concern to the folks being interviewed. And so, with that basis, IACE, my organization, came into the project at a later stage. And we helped the two previous organizations put together a guidebook focused on generative AI use. And so I'll be sharing with you today some of that work, particularly the slice related to the teacher interviews, even though the guidebook itself also contains information from the interviews with administrators and students. So let's now give you a moment to reflect. I want you to think for a minute about which image best represents your attitude toward generative AI. And we're not necessarily going to share these. I just wanted to start with a moment of reflection so you could just take your own pulse and think for a minute. You may have more than one, and that's fine. How you feel about generative AI. Eric in the chat mentioned number one. I do not disagree, particularly on some days. Um, I will say that I have encountered folks at various moments and in various contexts who are just sort of all over. TJ said depends on the use case, all of them. I appreciate that. Jamie said number six, a more positive one. Okay, good to see that perspective as well. The reason I wanted you to think about this is because research shows that teachers' beliefs about technology relate to two important things that we care a lot about. One is student performance, and one is teaching practice. And then obviously, student performance and teaching practice are related in and among themselves. So these attitudes that we bring about generative AI, which might depend on the context, might depend on what's in the headlines that day or the use case, have really big impacts on what's happening in classrooms and particularly teacher beliefs. So that was the motivation. One of the motivations for this work is to get a better sense of what teachers believe about AI, because while the data doesn't exist yet for generative AI, we know from other technologies that what teachers believe about the technology may be linked to their students' performance, perhaps via their teaching practices or otherwise. So this is important to look at teacher beliefs on this topic. So as I mentioned, there was a body of interviews, about 100 interviews, mostly teachers, some administrators, some students. These were conducted across the country. There were some private schools, there were some public schools. They were across K-12, they were across different subject areas. So there was really a broad base of interviews. And because part of the product here was a guidebook, we did something a little unusual, and I want to give you a heads up about it because otherwise this could feel a little cringy. And that is that we specifically asked teachers who were interviewed whether we could have their permission to share a photo, their name, their school, and what they taught in the guidebook. So as we go through my slides, you will see some pictures of teachers, you'll see names of teachers. It's not obviously what you would see in an academic paper, but because the context was different, we asked for that permission. And some teachers gave, permission for one and not the other. They may have wanted to be described as say, an English teacher in the Midwest. So not all did want to grant that information, and so we respected requests for anonymity. So I just wanted to flag that. And I also wanted to flag that these interviews were conducted over a relatively long range of time. They were obviously all conducted after the introduction of ChatGPT, but I can tell you as I read through and coded some of these interviews, it became obvious that some were relatively soon after ChatGPT was introduced, and then some, I believe, were conducted into 2025. So there is a bit of a span of perspectives and awareness of the implications of these as these have been unfolding all around us of what generative AI would mean in a K-12 context. So with that background, the product is a guide to AI in schools, perspectives for the perplexed. This, again, is a guidebook targeted at those working in the K-12 space to try to provide guidance. However, it is a bit like building the plane while you're flying it. We obviously don't have decades of thought, research, perspective, and philosophizing on what it means to use AI in schools. So this is sort of a first stab, a preliminary effort. But that guidebook is available. We did try to flag very clearly that this is a product of its moment, and we fully expect in 5-10 years to know a lot more about best practices for AI in schools. Thank you for adding that link to the chat. I appreciate that. I also want to flag something else. We worked with a graphic designer on this, and the graphic designer suggested we put a keyboard on the cover. And I said, that's a great idea. Let's do that. However, can you put just a few keys in the wrong place?
Hey friend, how are you?
I have
Hi, I
so
think
much to
we
tell
need
you.
for
Can you
everyone
talk?
on the call
Yes, I
to be
can.
sure they're muted,
Okay,
which I
I
don't
heard
think
back
I
from
can
the
do.
dean.
Because I'm hearing
So you and I
some
spoke on Friday night. I
crosstalk.
got a message, an email late, like
Yeah,
11 p.m. on
I can't
Sunday
mute this
from the
person.
dean. I
Melissa
was asleep.
Mendenhall, can you
So I
please
woke
mute
up in the morning
yourself?
and
We're
he's
getting
like,
some crosstalk.
"Oh, Kalani." So he'd had that email for like six
All
days
right.
or something.
Uh-huh.
I've
I
heard
guess
that he
we'll
gets really
press
behind on
forward
email, but I don't
since
know.
I can't control
Anyway, he's
that
like,
audio in the background, and
I'm
I
really sorry to
apologize for
hear
that.
that you're wanting to leave.
At any rate, you'll
Give me
notice a
the
few keys
opportunity to
on that
meet with
keyboard are in
you
the
to,
wrong
at
place.
least
Hmm.
And
go
I
through
think that
some
reflects one of the
options,
interesting things
and
about this moment with
maybe
generative AI.
I can talk you.
Um,
So I'm
I was
still
having
leaving.
this
He hasn't told me. That's
conversation
the end
with
of the story.
my family
I'm still
that
leaving.
science fiction has prepared us to do a
I
lot of
know, I'd be
thinking
happy if
about
you
AI
stayed. You
and
know,
other
I love
advanced
having you there.
technologies.
I know, but
I'm
I
sorry, I'm going to
really
ask one more time. Melissa Mendenhall, can you
appreciate
please
you.
mute yourself?
Hmm.
And
Because
so
I
I
don't think I
said,
can do that.
okay, yeah, I've
Okay.
kind of made up my mind, but I'm happy to
Science
talk.
fiction has
We'll be
prepared us
fine.
to do a
And
lot of
I
thinking about
went
advanced
to his
technologies,
study. So
including
he's on the
AI,
phone.
but to
He's
my
like, I'm
knowledge,
just really
there is
surprised.
not science
Why did this
fiction that prepared
happen?
us
And
for a
And I
technology
said,
that
okay,
does
well, I'll
amazing
tell you,
things, say
I'm a
97%
certified,
of the
I said, I love
time,
teaching.
and
That is
commits
my
some
passion.
whopping
That is my
errors the
number
rest
one
of the
thing. But I
time.
feel it's just
There may be
very
exceptions to
far
that,
up
but
the
in general,
my
what we
priority
see
list
from
now
AI and science
because of these
fiction
research
is
expectations
maybe
and
it
these
goes
committee
rogue, maybe it's
expectations.
Hmm.
And he goes,
controlled
but
by
you're tenured,
ability,
aren't you? And I
maybe
said,
it's
yeah. And
all
he goes,
powerful
so
and
why are
humans
you
lose
letting
autonomy,
research worry
something like
about
that.
you? We can do away
But
with
this
that. You
idea
don't have
of
to do as much
tools
research
to
as you're
get
doing.
things
And I'm like,
wrong every
okay.
once in a
And then he's
while.
like,
Feels like new territory
why
for
are you
most
serving on
of us.
so
And
many
I think that's
committees? Let's
important
get
to
away with some of
consider.
those
So
committees that
that's
you're
why I
serving on. And I
suggested
said,
that for the
that's the
cover,
thing. I don't
and
think we
it
can
makes me
because
smile
I'm
every
the
time I think
tenured
about it,
school
even though I know
rep
most
on
people probably
all
don't know,
these
'cause there's a few
campus-wide
people
commit,
that
not all
know.
of them, but
Mm-hmm.
there's so few
Okay.
of us that we have to serve on so many.
This is
You
one
know,
of our
we
highlighted
pay all this amount on
quotations
campus,
in
and yet
the
we're all doing
book,
triple the amount of
in
committee
the
work that we
guidebook.
need to be
Yeah.
doing. And I said,
Yeah,
it's really
Kristen, I'm
unfortunate.
sorry. I know it's a
But,
little
you know, I
frustrating.
did ISTE
I'm
too
not
some months
sure
ago, and I thought, oh, once I get
about the
done with ISTE, I'll have
crosstalk.
a better work-life balance.
I don't
Then, you know,
see
I think I've told
any
you this, and then I
ability
said,
for
you
me
know,
to
and then I had to work on my tenure
either mute or
portfolio that
remove
summer,
from
and
the
that never came.
meeting
And
the
then
person who
I
has
thought,
some
okay,
audio
now I
in
have
the
tenure and I'll
background.
have control. And I said,
So I
and
think
then
we
I was
may
sitting
just
in
have
that
to
Friday
soldier
ISTE meeting
through.
where
If
no one was
someone
happy to be
knows
there,
some
and I said, you were
tricks I
there. This
don't
is what I said to
know,
the dean. You could
that
cut
would be
the
very
air with a
helpful.
knife. You could cut the air
But
with
I
a
think
knife.
otherwise I'm
And
just
I
going to press
said,
through
and I
since
was
our
in that
time
room
is
with a
limited.
bunch of tenured people that were
At any
being
rate, this sentiment, I
required to
think,
do something they
reflected
really
something
didn't
we
want
heard
to
from a
do.
lot of
And I
teachers, which is
said,
that with AI
you
accelerating
know,
so
I didn't want
fast,
to be
it
part of
presented a
that.
real
I
struggle
really
to
didn't want to
catch
be
up
part
to.
of it. I am
And they
ISTE
very
certified,
much
so it
felt,
didn't even really affect me. But
particularly
the
coming
fact that
quickly on
tenured
the
people,
heels of the
and I thought
pandemic,
that that was
that
kind
they
of the
were
pinnacle
struggling
that
to
once I
catch up
reached
to
that tenure,
changes in
you
their
know,
classroom,
and I
particularly
said,
with
I
AI.
know how ISTE was sold to
Now,
me
getting
on
into
some level,
themes that
and
were
I
really
felt like
prominent
I
with
was
our
sold
interviews
something
with
else than what it
teachers,
actually
we heard
was.
a lot
And
about
I'm
risks
really
for
concerned that
social and
she sold
emotional
it to you
well-being,
in the same way and is now
aka
throwing
for
you under the
excessive
bus.
screen time.
Oh, so
And
good.
that
I'm
seemed
so
to
glad
be
you
a
said
major
that.
theme
He
for
said,
Oh, I'm
teachers,
so glad you said
is
that.
even before generative
What?
AI came on the
he
scene,
said, this had
there was
nothing
already
to
a
do with
lot of
Krista. So
concern that
I thought I'll
students
let
were
Melissa
spending too
know.
much
Oh,
time in
wow.
front of
We've been
screens.
wrong. He
And so
said,
any generative AI
I want
use
you to
was
know
seen as just sort
that
of another
I have
layer to that
had a
problem.
professional and
We can
personal
always stop and
relationship
restart the Zoom
with
call. That
Richard
way Melissa
Collada.
won't
You know how
have
we
to
had that
jump
guy come and
again.
speak to us that was so
Mm-hmm.
I
with
see a
that,
thumbs
you
up.
know, for
I think we
years.
can try
And
that
I
since
had
I did not
decided that
have an option
faculty
to
would be
approve
doing this
people
ISTE thing
entering.
before
I
I
don't
had
know
ever
if
even met
that will
Krista
work.
Ruggles.
But let's go ahead and
And
try.
then I thought,
I'm
Um,
not sure I believe
I
that,
will
but
leave
if
the
he's
meeting and come back.
protecting her, fine.
I don't think I can
Yeah, that's great.
actually stop and restart, but let's take 2 minutes and try that.
Yes, this was an independent
Have
decision
everyone
that
leave and
I
come back and
made.
see.
Wow.
Sarah, I appreciate that
It does
suggestion.
not have anything to do with Krista. And I said, okay.
Okay.
I said, that's what she's telling people, because I kind of wanted him to know.
Yeah.
I said, you're being thrown under the bus for this.
Not
And he
seeing
said,
the
well,
option
I
to
feel
remove.
strongly ISTE is in thousands of schools, you know, and then you get the whole list.
Okay, welcome back. I hope everyone made it back, and I also see a NARS staff member here now, so hopefully that person has more controls over the meeting than I do, and so if we have additional issues with crosstalk and background noise, we can address that. Again, I appreciate everyone's patience with that. I know it's very frustrating. Okay. One thing that I will confess surprised and delighted me a little bit in working through coding these interviews was the extent to which teachers were very focused not just on pragmatic concerns related to AI, but also ethical principles. And in the interest of time, I won't go through all of these, but just to flag a couple of them. One was justice and fairness. And so a fifth grade teacher described that they learned about an image generation tool where if you asked it to generate the image of a scientist, would generate sort of a very stereotypical individual that didn't represent the diversity of the field. So that was an example of the kinds of ethical concerns teachers had around AI. Another one that we heard a lot was the issue of responsibility, particularly the issue of being mandated reporters. So this teacher mentioned that if one of their students shared various kinds of information with them as the classroom teacher, they're a mandated reporter for things that threaten students. However, if some of the teacher's tasks are replaced by an AI system, whether it's, reading reflections or whatever, sharing kinds of information, is the AI a mandated reporter? Is there even a mechanism for that? Would the teacher be aware of that information? And so it would present as almost sort of a loophole and an ethical concern for mandated reporter laws. Another one I wanted to flag, because not all of the ethical concerns were negative, is a teacher mentioned, and I'll read this directly because I thought it was stated in such an interesting way. My time is my greatest commodity. I'll never get it back. So I'm making a conscious decision to create a lesson plan using AI because, again, this is my time. So that was what a teacher viewed as a positive way, an enhancement to teacher well-being. And you may have noticed that this is the same teacher who expressed the concern about the stereotypical scientist. I think that's interesting as well, because teachers generally were not one-dimensional in their views on AI. They recognized nuance and complexity and advantages and disadvantages throughout the interviews. And so I think it's important to note that as well. They generally did not divide sort of neatly into AI haters and AI proponents, but rather saw potential benefits and disadvantages across the spectrum. We found that teachers felt that there was some potential for AI to improve student learning. They pointed to things like the ability to spend more time on critical thinking if AI could take care of lower level skills, that perhaps AI could provide personalized feedback or differentiated learning. And one I thought was particularly significant is that it could help students avoid wheel spinning. And so for this one, a computer science teacher flagged that normally if a student is stuck on writing a program, well, there's one teacher and 20 odd students in the room, so that student may have to wait a good long time for personalized help or feedback. But if the student has access to an AI tool, they're likely to be able to use that time more productively to get feedback. So that's the positive side of the equation for impact on student learning. But there were also some harms teachers recognized related to things like creativity, skill development, independent thinking, and so forth. And I thought this quotation was interesting from one of the teachers, a social studies teacher, who said, I think making random connections allows them to see more complexity that could potentially be lost. And if they're not practicing, it sounds weird to practice creativity, but if they're not practicing that kind of thought when they're in high school, they potentially can be less creative thinkers later in life. And that is terrifying. I really, really worry about that. And that was a representative concern. Um, I know when we talk about, excuse me, AI in the workplace, we often talk about de-skilling or lack of skill development if a worker's relying on an AI tool. And it was the same idea here that teachers were afraid students just may never develop these skills if they're relying on AI tools instead. We also found that teachers were able to identify ways that AI could save them time, but also ways AI could cost them time. And the two main costs, which I think perhaps are a little more counterintuitive than the time savings, were one is teachers felt an obligation to sort of keep up with the latest in AI technologies and what they could use and how to support students in using them and, how to monitor and so forth. And then also that the tools required them to spend more time on issues related to academic integrity violations. So those were their concerns related to time use. One area where there was not this sort of balanced perspective was on the issue of banning AI, where we heard pretty uniformly that teachers felt like a ban would simply not be effective. And I want to flag that among the folks who were interviewed, we had some teachers who I would say were just far, far on the end of the spectrum of being AI skeptics, right? And even those teachers who basically didn't want AI anywhere near their students, anywhere near their classrooms, didn't want to use it themselves, even those teachers felt like a ban would probably raise more problems than it solved. And so, again, this was one of the rare topics where there was uniformity or near uniformity, that banning just wouldn't accomplish the goals teachers had, even if they weren't huge fans of AI. And one issue that was raised that I think was particularly salient is the perspective that, sure, a school might, for example, be able to ban access to the ChatGPT website on the district's web access on the district's network. However, what that meant is that students who had other ways to access, whether they had a phone with a data plan at school that they could hotspot, or whether they were going to use it at home and so forth, that it wouldn't really be a ban. It would be a ban for students who didn't have alternative forms of access. So again, that was one of our rare areas of near uniformity, is that bans simply wouldn't meet the goals teachers had. We also focused in the questioning in these interviews about the issue of setting AI policies. And here there was an interesting contrast on the question of whether AI policies should be set school-wide or should be set by teacher. And in defense of the school-wide or district-wide AI policy, we had some teachers say that this would be clearer for students, it would be easier to enforce when you have that level of uniformity, and so therefore the school-wide policy would be a benefit. But on the other end of the spectrum, we had teachers argue really strongly for teacher-set policies, mainly to preserve teacher autonomy. And so the idea there is that in different disciplines or with different preferred pedagogies or types of assignments or what have you, a school-wide policy might not provide enough flexibility for teachers, and therefore it would be better for teachers to set their own policy. So again, there we also saw a variety of perspectives. In the comments for schools that had AI policies, and let me just stop here and say that at the time these interviews were conducted, many schools or districts did not, in fact, have AI policies in place. But for those who did, teachers mentioned that the conversations were structured around their core values, meaning the policy may have ended up with pragmatic guidance, but it began with what the schools valued and what the teachers believed about education. One big issue that was raised was how to vet different AI tools. And this was a concern, particularly because with recognition that the field is changing so fast, it's really, really difficult to vet these tools. For example, even if you were to perform an excellent vetting of the current model of ChatGPT, how many months will it be before there's a new model with different features that may require additional vetting? So that was complicated. There was a recognition that even in the absence of formal AI policies, there were lots and lots of conversations, informal and otherwise, about AI. And then I think this final comment's important to flag, particularly because it came from someone who I think was oriented more towards the AI proponent side of the continuum, who said that when these policies are set by groups of teachers, you don't want everyone to be the agreeable type. That even this person recognized that you wanted to see all sides of the issue. And so having some AI skeptics would be helpful, even from that person's perspective. Okay, one of the things we featured in the guidebook were some case studies, particularly where we thought there might be issues that teachers may or may not have encountered or considered. And this is one of my favorites. As a former teacher myself, I can just imagine this and how complicated it would be. So the setting is, this is a computer science class. It's a lesson and using software that the teacher had used in the past. But this semester, in the middle of the lesson, one student says, "The code is showing up for me." And the teacher is thinking, "What do you mean the code is showing up for you?" And the teacher says, "I go over to the student, and sure enough, this tool over the summer built an AI generator And so now as the student starts typing, the AI generates what they assume the student is going to want to know. And the teacher expressed frustration that, first of all, they weren't informed, even as a regular user in the classroom of this tool. And they apparently weren't even given a default to opt out. There was a way to do that, right? But the teacher had to deal with it immediately, be sure every student did it. And I will note, just parenthetically, I noticed on Google Forms, which is a tool I've used in the past, that within the last month, they started automatically inserting AI generated summaries of free response questions above the raw texts themselves. And so I felt a little bit of that as someone who would choose not to use an AI tool in that situation, or who would choose to review the raw data myself, think about themes myself before turning to an AI tool. I was not thrilled to see those automatically on top of the raw results. So I can certainly feel this teacher's frustration in this situation. I also wanted to flag that we definitely had what I would call hardcore AI skeptics, and that viewpoint is represented by an English teacher who said, "I don't want to become AI literate. I've never played around with AI just to see what it can do. I don't want to. I have sufficient concerns about the environmental impacts and the intellectual property theft questions that even casual use feels ethically questionable. Naysayers like me will continue to push back on this idea that we all just have to get comfortable with it." And I wanted to flag this sentiment, particularly for this audience, which I assume consists largely of education researchers, because I think one of the challenges we face is thinking about research participants who may have this sentiment, whether they're a student or a teacher participant or graduate student, pre-service, whatever their role is. Um, this viewpoint is not unheard of. And so I think we might think, before we think about using AI tools along our research process, how we will handle folks that have this viewpoint when we are thinking about integrating AI tools into some part of the research process. Teachers also had lots of opinions about what teachers should know about AI. I was pleased to see a general awareness of some concerns. Um, in other words, they're not just sort of repeating what we might call the marketing hype of AI tools, but there's an awareness that AI output can be inaccurate. There's an awareness that you need to critically assess the tools. There was, I think, particularly an awareness that various AI tools might impact the student-teacher relationship. And here I appreciated the sentiment of an English teacher who said, "Yes, I realize I could save," and I'm going to paraphrase here, but could save a ton of time having an AI tool grade and give feedback on my students' writing. But this teacher said, "That's how I find out about the kids. That's how I get to know them. They're very honest on paper." And so I thought that was an interesting reflection on the trade-off that exists sometimes between efficiency and relationship building that can really come to the fore with AI tools. This is a theme that surprised me. I didn't expect it to be as prominent it was, but it was very prominent. We had many teachers express concerns that it was hypocritical for teachers to use AI use either in general or in situations where their students may not be allowed to use it. And one that I found particularly kind of entertaining was a teacher talked about feeling like they needed to close and lock their classroom door between using ChatGPT to get lesson ideas, right? As if that was behavior they needed to hide from everyone else. But there was a great concern about the issue of hypocrisy in the use of AI tools, and I thought that was very, very intriguing. We also tried to get a sense of the landscape of how teachers are currently using AI. And really, the use cases ran the gamut. And this may reflect the fact, again, that the interview pool was quite large. It went K-12, it went across basically all the major disciplines and some minor ones. But we heard about teachers generating lesson plans, generating specific learning activities, differentiating instruction, basically serving as a thought partner. And just to clarify that a little bit, we had a few teachers give the analogy that just like they might sit around in a faculty lounge and sort of bounce ideas on a variety of topics over their human colleagues, they might use an AI tool the same way as sort of a thought partner to bounce ideas and generate ideas and vet ideas with. They talked about using it to assist with feedback and assessment. One I thought was particularly interesting is using AI to teach AI literacy. And some of these were, to me, really intriguing and really quite clever. So, for example, there was one journalism teacher who liked to give maybe almost daily quizzes on current news stories. And as you can imagine, that's an incredible burden on the teacher to create those quizzes virtually every day for their classes and not be able to reuse them from year to year. So this teacher used AI to generate the quizzes, but then the interesting part is the teacher recognized that sometimes the answer choice selected by the AI was wrong. And so this teacher gave examples of a student saying, that answer is not right. And the teacher would just, disclose, I used AI for this. Let's take a look. Let's go back to the article and say, yes, you are correct, right? The AI answer was wrong. The correct answer should be whatever other option. Let's correct that. And therefore model for the students that AI output is not always accurate. So I thought that was interesting. Another interesting use case, perhaps of particular interest for the NARST community, is a science teacher described generating inaccurate images using AI. So, for example, they might ask AI to place an animal in an environment it doesn't live in. Now, not something super obvious like a flamingo in a polar environment, but something a little more subtle, and then presenting that image to the students and saying, this image is AI generated. What inaccuracy does it show? And so again, you have the teacher meeting the sort of disciplinary objective of understanding animals in their habitats, but then also an AI literacy objective of understanding that you can get AI to generate basically any image, even if it's inaccurate. So I thought those were particularly clever and innovative and interesting uses of AI that involved AI literacy in a really interesting way in different disciplinary contexts. Teachers also mentioned using AI to assist with their own writing. One of my favorites here is to help draft responses to intemperate parent emails, right? So they could sort of, calm down and vet and politely state what they wanted to state. So those were some of the use cases that teachers mentioned for their current AI use. We also heard from a lot of teachers who said they were not going to use AI, at least in some cases. One was an environmental science teacher who said they were not comfortable with the environmental footprint of AI tools. One was a teacher who tried to use it for student feedback, but after experimenting, felt like their feedback was much better. One was a very experienced teacher who said, basically, I already have a toolbox. I don't need to recreate things with AI and vet them. I already have materials. One felt like as an English teacher, they had a very distinctive voice and they didn't want AI text to substitute where it didn't capture their voice. And then one I thought was intriguing is a teacher who said, I went to marble composition notebooks 100% across the board. And in terms of discourse in my classes, it was the best school year I've had. So that felt like sort of an interesting departure from technology that at least that teacher felt was very positive in their classroom. Now, for most teachers, they felt like schools should be devoting instructional time to teaching students about AI. They did, however, have a wide variety of reasons from that, ranging to it promoting equity. And this was a concern that basically stemmed from concern that students in wealthier school districts would learn how to use AI. And if their students didn't have that opportunity, they might be left behind, and also that parents were demanding it. They thought it might help students prepare for their futures, help them critically evaluate AI output, promote responsible use, and so forth. And then also, I'll just flag the final one on the list is promotes academic integrity, particularly as students went to college, if they understood, for example, how to cite generative AI as a source and so forth. Now, I will flag here that no, I won't flag there because it didn't make it onto my slide. But we did have a contrasting opinion from MIT's Teaching Systems Lab, arguing kind of on the other side that one of the main skills required for successful AI use is content knowledge, which schools are already teaching. And because we don't yet know best practices for using AI, it may be better for schools not to jump the gun, to wait for that research on best practices for AI use and teaching about AI use, and focus on content knowledge in the interim. Okay, another case study I thought was intriguing came from a state that had digital literacy standards. And the way this teacher explained it is up through second grade, students conducted their digital literacy exercises in sort of a walled garden, mainly not the internet. And so it would be easy to prevent them from using generative AI. But then the teacher said, all of a sudden in third grade, students are doing internet searches using, Google search or another engine. And as I'm sure everyone knows, in most instances, an AI overview will be appended to the top of Google search results. So basically, you have no choice, right? If the pre-extant standards require students to do internet searches, they will be exposed to AI-generated content, and they need to know what that means, where it came from, how to interpret it, and so forth. But this teacher felt that the flip side of that is that integrating AI literacy doesn't require something entirely new, right? The students are already doing internet searches as part of the digital literacy standards. And so adding that becomes then a natural place to add that AI literacy component. So a bit of a double-edged sword there. Another topic where we saw contrasting opinions was on the issue of whether professional development should cover AI. And here we had teachers who felt that the student experience would be better if teachers had some training in what AI was, how it works, what you can expect from it, weaknesses, and so forth. And so a yes vote for professional development. And on the other side, there was a teacher who basically expressed the opinion that when it comes to most PD, most teachers feel like they have a long list of other tasks they need to or want to accomplish that take a higher priority than the PD. And if AI becomes just one more topic, it competes with that list of priorities. It also competes with other professional development priorities. And so therefore they were not a fan of the idea of professional development related to AI. Another interesting topic with a variety of perspectives was, should AI change what or how students are taught? And we had teachers who thought that assignments could be more meaningful because the lower level skills or lower level thinking could perhaps be handled by AI. We had a math teacher, and I don't think it was accidental, it was a math teacher, express the idea of what are the math concepts and math skills students need if they have access to generative AI for the rest of their lives. And then we had one teacher sort of throw their hands up and say, I don't know what the future of writing looks like, right? In a world with generative AI, what writing skills do we need in a world where everyone has access to generative AI? So that gives you a sense of the range of perspectives. And this is very much an open question related to the impact of the what and how students are taught. An enormous concern was inappropriate student use of AI. There were lots and lots of perspectives and opinions on what could or should be done to either prevent or respond to academic integrity issues related to use of AI. This is obviously a very complicated issue with a lot of different dimensions. And a lot of challenges teachers felt. They often felt like there weren't any particularly fantastic options. They certainly didn't want to accuse students of AI use when that might not be the case. They also didn't want some students using it and sort of getting away with it, and getting excellent grades based on AI generated work, while other students saw that and struggled and maybe got disillusioned or discouraged. So this one felt very, very challenging for the teachers that we interviewed. The topic of AI detectors also came up. And here I was pleased to see that teachers were very much aware of the challenges of AI detectors. One science teacher had personal experience with other teachers who said, this AI detector flagged student work as being AI generated, but I sat with that student and helped them do it. It absolutely was not AI generated. So they recognize that the detectors are not foolproof. Some teachers pointed to issues of trust that come up with the use of AI detectors, and other teachers were aware that some research suggests that the false positive rates of AI detectors can vary based on student demographic factors, and that it's very, very concerning, particularly for students where English is not their main or primary or first language. Their work may be more likely to be flagged as AI generated when it's not. So at least some teachers are aware of these issues and their implications. And then finally, is sort of a wrap up, the issue of, do we need and want AI in our schools? And again, there was this sort of span of perspectives, with some teachers feeling like it may be one more tool that helps us close the achievement gap, and other teachers feeling like, in general, educational technology tends to promise more than it delivers, but also recognizing that the one exception to that is technologies can often help students with disabilities, and we might hope that generative AI could fit into that category. So, wide variety of perspectives there. Some teachers kind of describe themselves as more open-minded. Some describes themselves as more cautious. I liked this idea that you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And it was very concerning to this particular teacher that if students don't develop these critical thinking skills in K-12 because of over-reliance on AI tools, that they may never develop them. And the society-wide implications of that are pretty scary. But other teachers felt like, as various technologies have been introduced, there's often great concern about their impact on learning, but eventually schools and teachers and students learn to adapt and adopt and move on. So again, kind of a variety of perspectives there. Now, I've been doing a lot of talking. I would love to hear your perspectives. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, but I also have some questions for you. One is sort of and I'll go ahead and sort of put these into the chat. One is sort of general responses to what these teachers saw. And then the second is how this might inform research. Again, I'm assuming most folks on this call are current or prospective researchers conducting educational research. And I'm wondering if you've heard anything here that might inform your thoughts about research directions related to generative AI or other topics. So those are my questions for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have for me. Eric, please go ahead.
Okay, first, Julie, thank you very much for your presentation. That was very informative. I'm a postdoc in the Bay Area, and I use AI both in my research, and then I've also been looking into how is it applied in a teaching context. So my general response is I'm glad you're doing this kind of work, because I think this is what's going to strengthen our field, so that way we understand what's coming. My probably biggest concern, and I see this more on the research side of things now, is that with generative AI, if you know how to put up the right guardrails, it's extremely powerful, meaning it knows to only locate contextual data, It understands the questions that you're using in that context. So any information that it pulls is going to be exact. It's not going to be hyperbolic or inappropriately summarizing out of context. So my question to you is, given that we're still kind of in the wild stages of how it's applied, how people are going to take shortcuts on it, how people are going to try to gain some sort of an advantage, my question to you is, if we don't use it in education, what sort of social justice issue does that cause? Because the way that I see this technology being used in the business world or really anything else, it's going to be a more efficient way to do business as usual. So how do you think we can, with all these different communities, different cultures, some maybe want to use it, others don't, how do you think the field can weave itself to maintain cohesion as opposed to just, creating a new wave of racism unlike anything we've ever seen?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly difficult issue, partially because my understanding is that there is ample research showing bias in AI output. And that's tricky because as a researcher myself, right, I do not want to use a tool that augments the bias that's already in the world. But I think what you pointed out was definitely something we heard from some teachers, which is or I should say, to the extent that this is a tool that improves efficiency, folks that don't use it are at a disadvantage. And so that's tricky to negotiate. Probably the best I can do is advocate for responsible use. The devil in the details there is we don't know exactly what responsible use looks like yet. Um, and so that's hard. I will, at the risk of self-promotion, share with you a website for another project we are working on, which is a project to develop guidelines for the responsible use of AI in STEM education research. Part of the reason that I wanted to share this is we are currently seeking reviewers for drafts of this guideline. And so you can find the page on the website that will let you apply to review the guideline, the draft guidelines, because we want a wide range of views on the guidelines. It's not transparently clear what the guidelines should be for responsible use. But I am more and more seeing generative AI use, particularly by researchers who are concerned about topics like equity or social justice, as one of managing tensions. And I think you articulated that tension really well, right, between the potential efficiency gains and some folks not benefiting from those. And then what I see is the other side of that, which is that we have evidence that many of these AI tools will output evidence of bias basically from their training data. And so I think managing that is the big question.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Kirsten yep, you're
Yeah.
unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, Kirsten Daler here from West Ed. I was curious more about your comments around teacher professional learning and what teachers saw as sort of value add. And I think there's a lot of emphasis right now on sort of implementation of high quality instructional materials, but then there's also this sort of, people needing to build out their technological, pedagogical content knowledge. And is there more nuance you could add to that commentary, or even things that you have come across that are not part of what's in the report related to how professional learning is viewed either by districts, administrators, teachers themselves, priority given to it? Yeah.
Right. So I think the challenge is just the life cycle issue, which is, if tomorrow I implemented the idealized, perfected version, right? Not that this exists, of AI professional learning, that would be out of date in 6 months, if not sooner. And so that kind of cycle is just brutal, right? With all the other topics we want to address in professional learning and so forth. So it's just really, really hard. I am very concerned that tools optimized for educational use will be seen as circumventing the need for professional learning. And I wanted to flag work done by, I hope I'm getting this name right, it's on the tip of my tongue, Common Sense Media. They did a white paper evaluating AI tools geared toward teacher tasks. And wow, it was super cringy. Not that their work was cringy, but that the tool's output was ranged from like cringy to horrific in terms of things that like none of us, like these are not debatable. None of us want to see these things in classrooms. Or the way that they treated students differently when anyway, so I'm very, very concerned with what they found about tools targeted at teachers and how folks might think, well, this reduces the need for PD because this tool is optimized for teachers when those tools may not be doing what we want them to do. Please, Mercy, go ahead. I think you're on mute, though.
I must say I really enjoyed the output of this research work, but I keep thinking, do we science teachers actually have a choice as regards AI? Because the students are going way ahead of us. A lot of the students are really involved in it. And if we have to talk about marking their script, if you want to talk about supervising them or whatever, we teachers don't have a choice than to go into AI ourselves. So I could see the advantages and disadvantages that you enumerated. But all the same, I would say, well, it's a tool, we just have to learn it. So thank you so much for the research work. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for that comment. We interviewed many teachers who had that perspective of basically students will use it regardless, so we need to put supports around that. But there were other teachers who felt like, no, we don't let students call the shots. That they felt like they could take efforts to restrict usage while recognizing that would be quite difficult. I do, and I'll share with you one that I thought was a little bit funny is one teacher wanted to stop unauthorized AI use. And so what they did is they said, basically, no more turning in digital documents like Google Docs, Word docs. You have to handwrite your assignments and turn them in. And then they realized that at least one student had ChatGPT answer the assignment, hand copied right onto paper what ChatGPT had written and turned that in. So the teacher realized that that was not effective. And so I think that goes to your point, right? That we have to be aware that students will do what they can in some cases to use AI, even when teachers make it difficult. But maybe the counterbalance story to that is the teacher who moved the writing to in-class, in composition notebooks, gave students time to do it, and felt like that was a very productive semester for them, for other reasons as well. And so I think the best case is probably that we view this as a time of exploration. We try to understand what works, what doesn't work, why it doesn't, why giving handwritten homework doesn't work is because some students will just copy what ChatGPT gives them. And take that sort of experimental attitude in terms of what seems to be working best for my students and why, and build on that.
Thank you very much.
Just sharing a funny anecdote. I'm reading from the chat here from TJ. I have a survey up on my website, and during this webinar, a 7th grade student went on and filled it and added their comments. The only window I see is cheating, which I will not partake in. AI feels untrustworthy. So this is interesting. For this webinar, we wanted to focus on teacher perspectives, but some of the students and then some of the teachers reflecting on their students' perspectives said basically, some students don't want to touch it. right? They are so afraid of being accused of cheating or doing something that constitutes cheating. Like they just don't want anything to do with AI. And that wasn't on my radar. I'm not in the classroom since the advent of generative AI. But I thought that was interesting. So that is definitely maybe something to have on our radars as researchers and as teachers, is that not every student is on board with AI use. I also love that quote, I want to be trained to be a critical thinker. That's
Yeah, and I think
interesting.
I think it was especially interesting that I thought that it's a very long survey. I thought that only educators would stick it through, and the what I said, what are the opportunities you see for the use of AI in education? That was the student said, the only window I see is cheating, which I will not partake in. And under will help you feel more confident. They said this is supposed to be for teachers. Oh well, I guess I don't know. Maybe some credibility, and they just kept and they went all the way to the end. And then their last thought was, despite feeling conflicted about AI, I'm pretty curious to see what AI has in store. I want to be trained to be a critical thinker. That to me
Yeah.
is brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
One, that the student made it through the end of my boring survey. But two, that they took the time to keep going and share their thoughts. And I was just watching a school board meeting near me, and a student said that they pushed on the school board to say, I think teachers should have more access to professional learning around AI, because we're asking, how should we be using AI? And the teachers are saying, we have the same question. We would love to
Yeah.
know how we should be using AI too.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I think for students, the cheating is like obvious. It's obvious how you could use ChatGPT to cheat. What is less obvious is that, maybe I could upload a PDF of a study guide and have it ask me questions and give me hints, right? Like that, those kind of use cases that may promote learning and promote critical thinking may not be as obvious, particularly to younger students or less experienced students. So that's interesting to me. There might be room there for some instruction or research around those kinds of uses.
For sure.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? My college-age daughter told me about a professor who had their students run their assignments through an AI detector before turning it in. Students cringed when their peers' assignments had high percentage of AI use. Yeah. I would be curious to know if that professor explained, that this is a probability, that it's not definitive. I will just also flag that we, as an organization, we often work with external partners and so forth, and we spent some time looking at plagiarism detectors just to be sure we never, right, we never want to inadvertently put our name on work that, has inappropriate copying in it. And one of the things we discovered, and this is sort of totally informal in-house work, but AI detectors were great, or not, sorry, not just AI detectors, plagiarism detectors were great at finding things that were not behind a paywall. But I tested several of these with my papers that were behind paywalls, and it did not recognize them as plagiarized, presumably because the tool wasn't getting behind a paywall. So I found that interesting. It could find abstracts, right? Those are all out there. So I have some concerns about these tools.
Just one other anecdote, and I know we're at top of the hour, but
Yeah.
thank you so much. My other daughter is a grad student, and she found AI very helpful to practice for her quals, to do role play
Interesting.
and to upload her research and the things that she was supposed to know for chemistry, and then ask, please give me questions that would be practice questions during my quals. And she found it super helpful for role playing. So just throw that in the hopper.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah,
again so much. Really appreciated your sharing your work.
Thank you. With that, I think we need to wrap up, but my email is a super easy, Julie at, actually, I'll just put it in the chat. I would love to connect with y'all since you have interest in this topic, as do I. So please be in touch, and thank you for being here today, and thank you particularly for your contributions. I hope everyone has a good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world.